Welcome, I'm Roger Anderson, Williamson County's mayor, and today we're going to have a very frank discussion with Joe Horne, our Community Development Director. How are you today?
I'm doing very well.
Specifically, we're not dealing with conversations of planning and zoning today. We want to focus our full time to the upcoming 2020 census that is required by Congress.
That is correct.
And Joe, this is his second full time, been fully dedicated to that operation being pulled off without any hitches.
No, I wouldn't say without hitches. I'd like to say we have new hitches.
Joe, let's go back and basically a time in history when Congress said we want to know what the population is in the United States. And then fast forward to where we are today and some of the protective measures. And it's not just something cities and counties do, it's required by Congress to do this every 10 years.
Not at all. Actually, it's a part of the United States Constitution. And at that time, it was set, we were probably the only game in town as far as representative democracy goes. And so you had, in order to do that, you had a House of Representatives that were based on, number of members were based on population. And so that was the genesis. It was essentially for representation. And over time, as the census went further and further out, it became useful in a lot of other areas. The federal government that came into being in 1787, I believe it was, is a lot different from the federal government we have now, or state governments or any others. And the census, in a lot of ways, has helped us out statistically because it gives us kind of a glimpse of where cities are going. And I know it's very important to a lot of businesses. You said it's kind of a baseline data. By the end of this year, the president gets delivered the census results, which ultimately will be how state, federal, and to some extent local governments divide their representation. But one thing that has happened over time with the government and the growth of government is the fact that a lot of the revenues that are distributed back, our taxpayers go into Washington, our tax dollars rather, and they come back. And a lot of this is based on the census numbers that we are developing right now. And so it's very important. I've talked to many people many times, and I've always kind of thought of it kind of a fairness aspect, the idea that we're getting the representation we're entitled to, and perhaps also getting the amounts of money that we have paid into the federal and even state governments come back to us. So fairness is a good quotient, I guess, of any circumstance.
Well, fairness is a good way to kind of build the next question that I'm asked. There's also some security measures in there and protection for that information that is derived from the many people. You're sworn to keep that information secret. Absolutely.
Well, it's census data. What we'll be collecting this year is, other than the raw numbers, will not be available, cannot be opened up for 70 years. It was interesting. Some time ago, I was on a walking trip to Roper's Knob, and we were discussing with the person doing the walking tour, well, why do they call it Roper's Knob? And he gave me the whole explanation about how they went back to the 1840 census and figured out that was the Roper family lived there, and that's why they called it Roper's Knob. And so you get those things, but there's quite a little penalty for divulging census information, and we stress when it's about the confidentiality of it. And so with that, we try to make that a reoccurring message when we're reaching out to different groups, that the idea of this is it is not something that can be manipulated to your disadvantage.
So how does the census work, or how will it work in 2020? This show is being taped, of course, and then in just a few days, you're actually going to have the kickoff for the actual census. You've been having a lot of meetings and pre-meetings and ribbon cuttings to announce how all of that works. And of course, you're working with the folks in the federal office. We're based out, I think, at Pittsburgh, and the people in charge are. You're helping them and they're helping you, but ultimately that falls on the shoulders of the local folks to get that done through the hiring process, etc. So kind of take us through that process.
Absolutely. A couple of things. I guess sometimes it's better to work backwards and to start from the end and take us back to the beginning. Census Day is April 1, 2020, okay? Roughly 2 weeks, 3 weeks before then, people will be receiving the information regarding the census in their mail. And it's not going to be in your name or my name. It's going to be in the name of a resident of whatever this particular dwelling unit is. And at that time, they will be given three options. One option is they can go online right then, right there, and fill out the census. They can also do it by phone. And finally, they can do it the good old-fashioned way, which is by sitting there with a paper form and working your way down the list with the questions. Typically, it's, filling out the census, I'm told, from this time around, they don't see it being any longer than a 10 minutes of your time. But taking it even further back than that, taking it to what we've been attempting to do, in my mind, we constituted what we call a complete count committee a little over a year and a half ago. And the idea with the complete count committee was to draw on stakeholders from multiple areas, government, business, not-for-profits and the like, with the idea that they became people that we could reach out to when we had different events. They became people that could advise us on how best to reach, let's say, constituencies they were either represented or a member of, with the idea that, at least in my mind, and my approach has always been, is keep something of a low-level buzz out there. Just the idea that the census is coming, it's important, it will be here, it won't take you very long, and when the form gets there, please fill it out. And the Williamson County has had a remarkable response rate.
In past decades.
Years, yeah. And and the thing is, you can be complacent or you can say, I would like to do better than the last time. So as far as response rates, we have certain areas in the county where the response rate is lower than others. And in those areas, with the assistance of the Complete Count Committee, the cities, and the different not-for-profits, we developed what we call a series of census hotspots. We have one in the building here. We have one at the library. Franklin Housing Authority has helped us. City Hall has helped us in Franklin a great deal, and Brentwood has. And the idea is we would put information out there. We'd put information about the census, why we do it, confidentiality messages, why it's important, because to make sure that the children get counted, because that seems to be one of the things that falls off. The children do not get counted in the manner that they do. And the other thing that we did was early on, as I've told somebody recently, I said, if you don't know how to do something, hire a millennial. And we did just that. We hired a part-time millennial who's helped us put together a newsletter. And we're on our 5th volume right now, and I think our 6th volume is under production, I think they say in the business. And the idea is we highlight what we've done. We highlight what our partners in the cities have done as far as urging their citizens to vote, or not vote, rather participate in the census. And so I think we've had a really, I'm much prouder of this effort than I was in 2010. 2010, I felt like we did a lot of right things, but I felt like this effort, and we've got a couple of things under development right now that I think will help us a great deal. In fact, one is as recent as 48 hours old, but I think we've figured out a way to very economically reach the entirety of this county with one big reminder during that census period. Please fill out your form. Now, we typically don't drop the other shoe, because it sounds a little bit like quid pro quo. God, that phrase comes up a lot these days. Sounds a little bit like that. But one thing that happens is the Census Bureau is a very persistent group of people. If you do not fill out your questionnaire either online, via phone, or mail it in, they'll be tapping on your door sometime, probably beginning as early as May, even into June, to try to run down those stray numbers. And so, to me, that's unless one relishes being woken up on a Saturday morning, just filling out the form the first time around takes care of a lot of things.
So, Joe, I know personally, as the mayor here in the county, how important that census data and information is. There's billions of dollars associated with the census when you
Annually.
That when you associate it with all the cities and the counties in our 50 states, it's just paramount that we get it right. Because the next time they're going to look at this is in the year 2030. Now, many people that are watching this show understand that cities will do census data recounts about every 4 years in their city. Franklin will do it a couple of times, and the faster growing cities will do it because they're trying to show that there's more people moving in than what occurred at the last decade of census tract, 2020, 2010, 2020. So they'll do updates to that. County side of government, we do not have that tool that we can use. It's not available to us to do a census count outside the city municipalities. So it's very critical to us to get that information, and so that we get the right funding from the government side, from the court side, excuse me, all the way to our parks and recs, et cetera, where we use that money. And when you think that you and I, as citizens, have sent that to Washington, I'd certainly want to try to get as much of it back in my community, even if you don't like census taking. Then do it for the good.
Absolutely.
Because that helps to hold your property taxes down over the long run. If I'm not getting resources and I'm having to do programs and don't receive money for it, then that forces our legislative body, our county commissioners, to have to react to that and look at it in a different fashion. So I do encourage people to take 10 minutes out of your day and do this. There's an enormous amount of cost that goes into preparing the census. I know you've spent countless hours on it. We've hired a part-time person. We've engaged many of the businesses and not-for-profits to help us out because it benefits every single one of us. And it is about money. It's about getting it correctly. It's getting it done correctly, but it's also about that information is sent back, and then those dollars are disseminated and programs are disseminated out. Now, from a demographic standpoint, in the world you live in planning and zoning area, it is so critical we know how many people live in this area and that area, and so a lot of that information over a period of time. We don't know the names, we just know numbers.
Absolutely.
Schools use it a lot about forecasting and building and programs and teaching curriculum. So the list is endless. The other part we want to touch on, if there are people out there that are interested in helping in this time also results in either part-time or full-time, and there's pay. Now, you don't have anything to do with that, but to kind of touch on that, if you're watching this and leaving a little extra spending money for a few months, here's an excellent way to do that.
Absolutely. Early on, we partnered quite a bit with the Census Bureau on their outreach efforts to find part-time employees. And I'd say it had a nice synergy to it because on one hand, it gave us a way to, again, get that low buzz going by we're talking about, hey, census jobs are coming. The other part of that too is it helped our ultimate job because that low buzz also means that there'll be theoretically fewer people they'll have to go and knock on doors and find and get the forms filed in that way. And so that helped a great deal. Now, and I'm sure they can flash it on here, the numbers that one can contact if they're interested, and they are still actively recruiting. And last word I had for Williamson County for part-time help is $26 an hour. Now, that's not bad. That's about I think that was about my first job. I think that was about half of what I made a week in my first job. So I was kind of excited about that part, but that was a long time ago too. But that is I would urge anyone that has that interest to take that on. I get an occasional phone call asking for that. I don't mind talking to folks about it, but I will emphasize I'm not on hiring committees, but I do urge them to talk to the folks that are on the hiring.
Well, and not everybody's that they employ will be going and making door-to-door
No.
knocks. They need people to man the phones. They need people to handle the computer skills. So, the gamut of occupation of what you can do, probably some of it can actually be done right at your home.
I think so, and that's
but they're local jobs.
Yes.
It's not like you're having to travel all the way into Nashville to go to work because they've got facilities set up here in the Cool Springs community.
Right. That's right, and again, we've tried to do different things to help them, with locations, as far as getting it into, dare I say, places like Columbia State. We early on in that process, we suggested they reach out at Columbia State because you've got a boatload of students and virtually all out there that, frankly, probably are looking for part-time.
I thought it was interesting just to touch on a few of the peculiarities of the program, and of course, this will be my 7th time having to do the census taking, and so that very first time that I was doing census taking is now being released. It's kind of the interesting way that I've looked at that.
Wow.
That I've lived a full life here, and yet the data that was put down on my first one, which would have been by my parents, is just now being released. Kind of an interesting scenario. But one of the comments that was made by Mrs. Anderson when she was talking was one of the questions are asking about people in your household at that moment, at that time you fill out the census on that date, which I really hadn't thought of. I know you know this, but the general viewing audience doesn't know this. My son, his wife, and three of my granddaughters are currently living with me. They've moved back from Texas, and he's employed here, and until they sell the house in Texas, they can't buy one here. So I've had 5 extra bodies moving around in my house over the last several months, which has been enjoyable to be around the grandchildren. But I thought it was interesting that if that census comes to my house on that day and they're still there, then I capture them in my census data track, which when I think about it, that's the correct thing to do.
Right.
But somebody's missing it in Texas.
Well,
but that's what we're talking about, it's that flexibility.
Absolutely, and they live here.
They're using our roads,
that's right.
the schools.
That's right. It is where, I guess you could look at it in terms of where you lay your head down on March 31st. Is when you wake up that morning, April 1, that's where you're counted. And they have other things too. You have circumstances. I know, and I didn't know this. Of course, I was not in college during during a census period. But I didn't realize that they, if let's say you're living in a dormitory, be it at MTSU, UT, what have you, they count you in that place.
Yes.
Not
back home where you came from.
And there's other people that get counted in place. Beasley Drive, for instance, they get counted in place. But those kind of institutional.
This was Century Court.
Century Court. Sorry about that. I am referring to the
jail.
Let's say Corrections Institute.
I'll call it like it is. It's true, but it's where you are on that period of time in your life, and that information is captured and used. So, Joe, I know we're closing in on kind of the end of the show. I want to thank you for your hard work and your team and working with the state and the federal people to pull this off, because some of the other interesting data that we've just recently seen and observed is that our county is about 230 to 235,000 population. So this will help give us, when those numbers are finally collected and released in 2021, we'll kind of know how we stand for March 31st or whatever that period of time. But the information that has been presented to us from an organization called Greater Nashville Regional Council, so kind of a regional area where your profession, the planners and the like, and then the elected officials go to try to deal with a multitude of issues, from housing to transportation to you name it. We're looking at it from a Middle Tennessee area. Out of this report, they took Davidson County and did the surrounding donut counties and said, what's the population going to be in 2025? The population percentages for Williamson County in 25 years is 148% growth. Now, that's hard for me sitting here in 2020 looking at 235,000 people, that in the year 2045, our population will be 500 and nearly 50,000 people. Our county was started in 1799. That's when we became known as Williamson County by Hugh Williamson. This is 2020, so that's about 220 years. To think that in the next 25 years, we're going to pass what took us 220 years is a little mind-boggling to me. So that's why it's so important, the census this particular time, because we won't do it again to 2030. And we're just 10 years closer to that maximum number, and we've got to get it right, and we've got to get that funding in place, because we've got to deal with the roads, and we've got to deal with the schools, and et cetera, et cetera. So just a little tidbit, it's very important.
It's absolutely important, and you're right. Even in my time, when I came to work for the county, we were 81,000 people, and that was maybe nearly 30 years ago now. And it's just, it is, when you're in this every day, you don't think about it, but then when you start pulling out your numbers and looking and going, that's a lot. That's a lot of people.
Well, you're talking about a 30-year span, but just drop back 10 years. We had 181,000 in 2010, and now we're estimated 230. So that's a 50,000 per person growth in a 10-year snapshot. If you break that down into divide 10 into 50,000, that's about 5,000 people a year. And if you break it down into a daily route, you're looking at 5 and 6 people a day moving into Williamson County, this place that we all have found and labeled as home.
Well, I remember you and I were talking several years back. We were talking about just what had happened I think during the course of your term. It was a little bit like, I think we concluded that statistically, if you walk through downtown Franklin, you saw 5 people walking. 10 years before, you could have only had 4 people
Yeah.
walking your way, and that's an astounding amount of folks moving in here. And many argue it's a good problem to have.
Well, Joe, another way to look at it, in the county currently, we have about 42,000 children that go to Williamson County Public Schools that are based in 49 different schools. If our population doubles, the question you have to ask is, will our school building program have to double? And the census will help us in a lot of that. You and I both know that our fastest growing population is between 0 and 1 and 19, but the next fastest growing population are those folks 60 and older. So demographics are going to change. Grandparents are going to come to be with their grandchildren.
Absolutely.
And so a lot of this data is going to be assimilated over the next 20 and 30 years. But 2020 is very important for the next 10 years because we know pretty much the growth patterns that are current.
Well, that is the one chance we get a snapshot. You look at what our breakdown was in these cohorts in 2010, and then we look at the same cohorts in 2020 and say, is our population getting older or younger, or just growing in all aspects?
Joe, we've spent a lot more time. We need to go. Thanks for being here. Thanks for your hard work and working on the census with throwing something else on your back with your regular load. I'm Rogers Anderson. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you around the next time.